Welcome to our webinar entitled Peaceful Options for Training and Careers, or POTC. I'm your host, Lorraine Stutzman-Amstutz, the Denominational Minister for Peace and Justice for Mennonite Church USA. POTC is a collaboration between Mennonite Central Committee US, Mennonite Church USA. And one of the goals is to counter the military recruitment of U.S. youth. And the project's vision is to connect young people with volunteer advisors or counselors who can assist young adults in finding non-military career, service, and training opportunities. And we'll hear more about the project from our panelists. Today, I'm joined by Joe Roos, Chair of the POTC Steering Committee. Joe is currently serving as a pastor and formerly co-founder of Sojourners Magazine. Welcome, Joe. Titus Peachy is a member of the POTC Steering Committee and previously served as coordinator for peace education for MCCUS, and currently serves as a counselor for the GI Rights Hotline and promotes conscientious objection to war and war taxes. Glenn Guyton is Executive Director of Mennonite Church USA. Welcome to both of you. And Melissa Atchison is the pastor of Manhattan Mennonite Church and a spiritual director. Melissa served as a pastor since 2021, has an MDiv from Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary and a BS in Forest Management from the University of Missouri, Columbia. She and her spouse, Bob, have lived in Manhattan, Kansas for 29 years and have 4 adult children. Welcome, Melissa. Before we begin from hearing from our panelists, please join me in a word of prayer for our time together. Loving God, we come today with hearts full of hope and possibility as we work with young adults seeking wisdom and direction for their future. As they stand at a crossroads, may their hearts be open to paths that lead to options of peace rather than war. Grant them the courage to explore alternatives that nurture life and build bridges of understanding rather than walls of division. May they know that there are many ways to serve, many ways to protect and care for others, and that their lives are valuable and needed in the work of compassion and love. Guide them in finding their place in creating a world where every life is honored and cherished. Amen. So I'm going to start with Titus. Titus, I believe you started a conversation with MCC and MCUSA several years ago about providing alternatives for young adults rather than joining the military. So can you tell us how all that began and how we got here?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I didn't start the conversation, but I participated in it. MCUSA and Mission Network staff pulled together a group of people from across the country, maybe a dozen of us or so, called Mennonites Against Militarism. And one of the ideas that developed as part of that larger conversation was the idea of figuring out how to offer viable options for education, job training, service for young adults out of high school without enlisting in the military. So we conceived of something called Alternatives to Military Enlistment Network, or AMEN, very catchy name. But as we talked about it further, we thought, that sounds kind of churchy. And we'd really like to make sure this opportunity is available to a broad spectrum of young adults around the country, whether they have a faith community or not. And so we settled on the name Peaceful Options for Training and Careers, or POTC in short. And out of those conversations, we developed a website, and that's where we are at now. We have a lot of work ahead of us to do, but that's how we got to where we are today.
Thanks, Titus. Glenn, maybe you can tell us a bit about your own motivation for being part of the military and now how you see the need for alternatives to the military as an important work for MCUSA.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Lorraine. My journey into the military was quite interesting, and I think it's really important to kind of set the stage of when I joined the military back in the late '80s. If you know, we were just coming probably a decade or so out of the Vietnam War. Really hadn't had any significant name conflicts right after Vietnam. Um, I grew up in the suburbs, kind of inner city in Houston, to I guess I would say, I don't know, a poor Black family. And, the military, if you are a Black kid, from with little means, the military was a very attractive option for you. It was a respectable job. You look good in your uniform. It provided a number of opportunities, and the likelihood that you would have to actually go to an armed conflict was very, very low at that time. And so, as a kid that did pretty well in high school, but I didn't have the money that I needed to go and get an education. And instead of taking out a lot of loans, it was just me and my mother. Basically, my dad died when I was 14, but it was just me and my mother, and a few other kids had went to the United States Air Force Academy before me, so that we were heavily recruited at the school that I was at, and it was just a good opportunity, just to prove how good of a young man that I was, and to get a job, and to just have that prestige that came with being a part of the military. So that's kind of why I joined. I really joined for the opportunity to get a good education and know that I would have a pretty stable future moving forward. And what was the other part of your question, Lorraine?
So the second part was how you see the need for alternatives to the military as important work for MCUSA.
Yeah, well, probably 35 years ago when I graduated from high school, I wouldn't have thought about that at all. But then I happened to meet Titus and a few other Mennonites after I had graduated, and became a part of the congregation in Hampton, Virginia. I really didn't understand that there were other alternatives. For me, it was the military. This is what you did. This was a part of the culture, a part of one of the opportunities that you had at that time. And I really didn't know what other things that I could tap into. And so being a part of the Mennonite community really opened my eyes to that, meeting people like Titus, who said, hey, there's another way to this. There are some other beliefs that you can live out other than this, God and country. Basically that's the military, God and country. The Anabaptist theology really opened my eyes that there was another way of doing this, and there were people that were really concerned about peace and justice, and it really helped for me connected to the civil rights movement. That was something that I understood, peace, nonviolence. I understood it in that context, but I didn't understand it in a broader context. And so one of the things that I did when I decided that the military was no longer for me was to start working with Virginia Mennonite Conference on their alternatives to military service. I said, the theology is good, but I still have to eat. I still have to take care of my family. And so how can we use the biblical principles of mutual aid, of community? How can we use those to help someone like me, who only joined the military really for the opportunities and for the options that it would give me? And so I think it's important, as we look at young people now and we think about the systems that they're a part of, how do we help them see other pathways, to let them know that the military isn't the only pathway for success. If you're poor, if you're an immigrant, if you might have made a couple of mistakes in your life, we were basically taught, especially during my days, that, hey, just go to the military. That's what you need to do. Get your life together. Go to the military. Well, there are other ways to do that, and other alternatives. So I think it's important for us as peacemakers to educate people, to let them know, because sometimes, like the Bible says, we're just perishing because of a lack of knowledge, right? We don't have the knowledge. We can't see the options, and we may come from families that don't know that there are other options. They're just doing what other people did. My oldest brother was in the military. My grandfather was in the military, and my middle brother was in the military. So just kind of, hey, this is just what you do if you want to get ahead.
That's so helpful. Thanks, Glenn. I think you also, you answered maybe my follow-up question about significant factors that lead young adults choosing the military. I mean, you talked about it being respectable. You talked about in some ways, maybe the only option if you wanted to get an education because that was the promise of what the military could offer. But so I'm wondering if we're now, as this group talks about alternatives and having the church be part of that and what that could look like, how would you, how do you think you would have heard that message back then? Where would you have heard that? How could you have heard it? Do you think you would have heard it?
Would have heard the messages for the alternatives?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, the only way I heard it was because I happened to go to Anabaptist Church and meet Titus, right? And so we need more people out there spreading this message. And I think that we do have an advantage now. We have the internet. We have some opportunities for people to Google and search some things. It was a little bit more analog in my day, but I don't think people really understand what this peace witness is about, especially as you think about the propaganda machine of the military. How many millions of dollars goes into connecting it to sports, to movies, to entertainment, all of these things. We're inundated with all these messages of yay, go military, and not so many messages of, hey, these are some alternatives. What happens after the military leaves? Who's going to care for these people? Who's going to mend these homes and mend these lives? So we have to spend some time and energy to get our message out there. And I do think social media and some of these other tools gives us a leg up now, but we do have a lot of churches and we have a lot of Christians that can share their message. And I think that's really important. People like Titus.
Like, let's get those on stickers, Glenn.
Yeah.
He like Titus. Thank you. Well, Titus, maybe you can talk a little bit more about the work of the volunteer counselors, because that's what Glenn's talking about. How do we get the word out so that we get calls from young adults asking these kind of questions about what my options are? So how do you see the work of the volunteer coordinators in POTC, and what's in your background that led your thinking in that direction?
Well, thank you. And thank you, Glenn, for sharing your story. I'll start a little bit with my background first and then get into the role of counselors and the way that we hope that this works. And so I became a conscientious objector and registered as one when I turned 18. And then I did alternative service in Vietnam for 3 years during the Vietnam War, teaching English to high school and university students in Saigon. And I learned to speak Vietnamese, and I learned an awful lot about what happens to a society that's gripped by war, what happens to families, and what happens to particularly young men. I had many young Vietnamese men in my classes who were trying desperately to avoid being drafted, but in many cases they had no other option. There were no alternatives. After returning to the U.S., some years later, I had the opportunity through my work at MCC to speak with a lot of military veterans, and also through counseling on the GI Rights Hotline, speak with active duty military folks, many of whom called us because they were having some kind of difficulty. It might have been a health issue, a mental health issue, or it might have been an issue of conscience. As a result of their service, they began to have some questions, some doubts about what they were doing. I currently continue to do counseling on the GI Rights Hotline, and I talk to a lot of young people who enlist, and then before they go to basic training, they change their minds. They don't want to go. Just this past month, I talked to a young woman from Oklahoma. She had joined the Oklahoma National Guard, and shortly after enlisting, she discovered that her financial aid package from the college that she had applied to was a lot more generous than she expected. And so that's really what she wanted to do. And in that situation, she didn't need the military anymore to help pay for college, but she thought she was trapped and she was desperate to see if there was a way out. So she called, she texted, we talked on the phone, we emailed. And I assured her that as long as she hasn't gone to basic training yet, there's still a way out without any kind of negative consequences. She wasn't convinced. She kept thinking that something bad was going to happen, but it didn't. She got out and she was immensely relieved that she could get on with her college hopes without having this military path ahead of her. We also frequently get calls from parents whose children have already gone to basic training, but they're having a lot of difficulty adapting. The discipline, the being yelled at, all of those things sometimes are very difficult for young adults to deal with. And they feeling very anxious, having panic attacks, perhaps they can't eat or sleep or they can't focus, and they're desperate to get out. Again, there are ways to get out of basic training if it's just not going to work, if it's not a fit. It's more complicated, but there are ways to get out. So these kinds of situations are what POTC is for. We want to help young folks avoid enlisting just because they think there aren't any other options. We want to make sure that they are aware of options for training, options for education, options for community service that could also help pay for college, or options for job training and jobs that they could partake in. And so the way to do that is we have a website and we have a group of 10 counselors ready to talk with young people and explore opportunities with them. We've accumulated a lot of information about loans and grants for college and about community service kinds of opportunities, as well as jobs and job training. And we don't have any kind of magic strings to pull, but we have counselors ready to walk alongside young people who contact us and help them look at those options and see if there's a way that they can do something that they really have a passion for rather than going the military route. I should say we have this website, we have these counselors. We've not had any contacts yet, people contacting the website and asking us for help. So that's one of the reasons for that is we have not done much promotion. And so that's what we're working on very much right now at this stage. We have just opened up a couple social media accounts. We're now live on Instagram and beginning to post content on there. We also have a TikTok account, which we will begin posting on soon. And one of the things that we are posting is we are interviewing young adults who have made other choices for college or service or jobs, and have them talk about what that experience was like, how they made the decision, and how it's working out for them. And we're putting these clips on the website and on our social media as a way of encouraging young people to see that there is a way that can be successful without taking the military route. And our hope is that other young adults, so if you have young adults within your network, please help them access our social media networks so that they can then share this content with their friends, because we think the young adults will likely be the best promotion vehicles rather than old people like us in order to share this content with their friends. So we're going to look at a couple video clips now that are online, and hopefully our technology will work here. We're first going to look at a video from Kai Tinsley, who's from Philadelphia. Okay, let me back up because I forgot to double check and share the audio. Okay, it's shared. So I think we're good to go. Okay.
One of my earliest memories was one of my earliest memories about college specifically is talking with my parents, and my dad made clear to me, hey, yo, like, we want for you to go to college, but we're not gonna be able to pay for it. And so when I remember hearing that, being like, oh snap, okay, if I want to go to college, I gotta find a way to pay for this that's not gonna come out of my parents' pockets. And that sounded very daunting. In my mind, I knew that there were scholarships that existed, but I thought that if you wanted to get scholarships, you had to be like a genius or cure cancer by the time you were 17 or something crazy like that. And thankfully, there was a few different ways in which I was able to secure funding for college. One, of course, is by filling out FAFSA. I know this year there's been a lot of issues with that, but that allowed me to get the Pell Grant and other forms of financial aid from the government, which didn't cover everything, but it was, it took a chunk out of my tuition. On top of that, there were the schools that I was looking at they offered need-based aid that covered 100% of financial need. So there's two parts of that, right? The need-based financial aid meant that they didn't really look at your grades when deciding how much money to give you. It meant that they looked at your financial situation and used that to decide how much money to give you. And then when it says that they cover 100% of your financial need, it meant that they looked at how much your parents made and they said, okay, if you're making under a certain threshold, we're basically going to cover everything. And so applying primarily to schools where that was their approach was one strategy I took, on top of applying to state schools, right, would tend to be cheaper, while still offering a great education.
So that's Kai's story, and we will continue to interview young men and women who went to college and offer their stories as well. The other thing that we're doing is interviewing military veterans, people like Glenn or others who've been to the military, and now after a number of years of service, perhaps they have a rather different perspective on what they wish they had done when they were making that choice, making that decision. Or maybe they've had some experiences in the military that have really changed their way of thinking. And so we want to make sure that on this website, we have some interviews with military veterans who can help young people have a more realistic understanding of what military service might be like than what they might get from the military recruiters. So we're going to hear now from Scott Roser, who's also one of our counselors. So he would be available as a military veteran to speak to young people who might want to get a more realistic understanding of military service. So I'm going to share the screen again, and we'll see if we can hear from Scott.
In one night, we dropped 38 bombs to try and kill 5 people in a little village, and we destroyed the entire village. And each of these bombs, each one cost $100,000. So $380,000 to try and kill 5 people who probably, made $1 a day, or in that region, just the poorest of the poor people in the world. And I'm just like, is that really bringing any betterment or peace into the world? Is like killing 5 people with $380,000 worth of bombs, and isn't there a better way to bring peace in the world? That's a lot of money. You could do a lot of good with that money.
Okay, and just a clarification, he's a veteran of the Iraq War, not the Gulf War, as was indicated on the ending slide. So in any case, you will find these and other clips on our website and on our social media, and they will also be appearing on TikTok shortly. So please help us share this information and these clips. Thank you.
Thanks, Titus. I think that's really helpful just to be able to have that visual and to hear from those and what their experience has been. So appreciate that that you're collecting those stories, that people will have those available. And thanks for sharing that with us. Joe, I know you're serving as chair of the POTC steering committee, so maybe you can tell us about your specific interest and maybe some of your motivation for this project. You're muted, Joe.
Thank you, Lorraine. For the past 53 years, I've been engaged in peace and justice work, education, advocacy, activism. For a number of years, in fact, when I was 25 years old, I co-founded the magazine called Sojourners, which has been and continues to be a magazine that looks at how to follow Jesus in the world today and how to be nonviolent and peace activists how to seek out justice. After I left Sojourners, I became a pastor in the Mennonite Church USA, also was a pastor for a couple of years in India. And during that time, it just part of the gospel that we as Christians are to be committed to peace and to justice. And so through my ministries that way, I've also tried to do that. When Lorraine sent out the invitation to be part of what became POTC, I jumped at the chance. It's a really important work that's being done. It's an incredible group of volunteers who are not only deeply committed to peace and justice, but also very committed to young people, and especially to high school students that are about to graduate and are facing these questions: what do I do now? So I from that background, am deeply honored to be part of this effort.
Thanks, Joe. Melissa, let's hear from you. You're one of the counselors that have been trained and are ready and waiting to engage. And so maybe you could talk about some of the life experiences that contributed to your passion for young adults, finding alternatives to the military, and maybe some of the challenges and hope that you find as you think about this.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. Our 4 children went through public high school in this small city where a large Army base is our neighbor. And I was thankful that I could opt out of them being contacted by military recruiters. And that was thanks to previous peacemakers' work here locally. And also, I knew that our kids were not the most vulnerable youth. Recruitment into militarism starts early here with events like Veterans Day. Elementary school children are bused or walk to our main street and they're given American flags to wave, or they carry posters that they've made as assignments to illustrate the glory of war in the guise of freedom. The social service providers in our city and neighboring cities recognize the cycle of deployment from the base and then return that comes with spikes in domestic violence and other crimes and increased need for mental health services related to what's been termed post-traumatic soul disorder. So as a church, we hope to help meet the needs of folks in our community. This feels like a case of so much loving effort, put into rescuing people from a metaphorical river, wondering how they fell in, and then going upstream to see what we can do to prevent more from falling in. So POTC is doing that upstream work, offering alternatives to military recruitment so that youth don't fall in. And I'm so thankful to get to be part of it.
So Melissa, maybe you could talk a little bit about the training that you went through as a counselor. What did that look like?
We met by Zoom a couple of times, and it was really helpful for Titus to explain to us, the backstory of why we're doing this, and for us to have conversations between one another. We were given homework assignments to search out resources that we're aware of, and also to send out announcements to invite people that could submit their own stories. Mostly it was this great website that's been developed that as counselors, we're invited to familiarize ourselves with the website so we know what the youth might be finding and what their questions might be about, and just being prepared to listen to individual stories.
Thank you. One of the things I'd like to do now for a few minutes before we close is I'd like to just ask if there are other thoughts that you all have, other comments, just things that we haven't yet talked about that you want to make sure we include. Now's the time. I'll just open it up for any of you who want to speak.
Yeah, if I can add something, I appreciate what Melissa said about, who's being targeted. I think that's a really important thing to think of, even as we're doing programs like this. Now, the military is, my understanding, really struggling now to get the numbers that they need. They're offering extraordinary incentives for people to join, but they're even changing the standards, right? So, some of this is broached in diversity and inclusion, but it's really, hey, we need more people to pull from. I think even a lot of immigrants, non-citizens are being recruited to be a part of the military. So I think people, what I like about this work is that people need to understand the options and maybe even understand some of the motivation behind what's going on in the recruitment process. And then you can make an informed decision. I really think it's important for young people to know what they're signing up for, especially in a time when we're more cognizant of mental health and wellness. We have more information than ever about some of the things that go on with our armed conflicts. I think we're able to see some of really some of the destruction and devastation that's caused by the military. We're able to see that real time. Before we weren't able to see these things. So I just think it's important for people to really take the time to educate themselves about what's going on, really kind of pull back the veil of patriotism, which some of this is wrapped around, and say, hey, what's the motivation? Who's being targeted? And then, what are some other things that I can do to achieve the goals that I have? And I do like the aspect of service where it's not just, hey, let's look at the negative of the military, but what can we do instead? What are some of the positive things that we can do as citizens, as Christians, as people, if we really want to make a difference and an impact in the world? What can we do that's positive to help transform lives and to really bring about, peace in a good way?
Now, I think that's really significant, Glenn, and both what you and Melissa talked about, because I think one of the things that we might hear is that, well, there's no draft, so why are we doing this? But that there's other reasons and other things that's happening in terms of recruitment and the things that you talked about that are drawing in our young adults. And so even more significant reasons why we should be doing this work, I think.
Just to follow up on what Glenn said too, you're absolutely right. The armed forces are desperate for recruits. They don't have enough people to do what they want to do. And so part of how they do that is they paint a glorious picture of what joining the forces will be: a steady job, possibility of education afterward, and being able to see the world. Well, just this morning, and we're in the midst of Israel's invasion of Lebanon, the Secretary of Defense of the United States issued a call to our armed forces to be ready to send soldiers and the Navy and other armed force personnel to the Middle East. And that's a clear signal that the United States is going to be going over there. They're going to see the Middle East, but they're going to be seeing the Middle East through the eyes of violence and killing.
Thank you, Joe, and also thank you, Glenn. As Melissa was talking, I was reminded that one of my hopes for the counselors after we get started and begin talking with young people is that we would continue to meet occasionally just to talk about what have our encounters been like, what have the young people been asking, what kinds of experiences have we had, so that we can learn from one another about how to better serve and respond to their questions. We do that on the hotline monthly. We have a monthly meeting of the counselors and talk about different cases and things that we're learning. So this will be an ongoing thing that we're learning as we go. Second thing I wanted to mention is that for a 17-year-old high school student, to talk to a military recruiter who's looking sharp and maybe has some medals on their lapel, there's a real power imbalance that's happening there because the recruiter has experience, has been in the military, and offers a picture based on their experience. And the young person is looking for information and looking for options. POTC, in my view, is a way of trying to level the playing field so that the alternatives and the counselor that is talking to the young people can help create other options and give the young people a more level playing field from which to make a choice. We can't decide what the young person will do for them. That's not our role, but we want to make sure that they have the information they need to make the most informed choice that they can. So it's a way of leveling the playing field.
Just like to say that my hope as a busy pastor is that I would be even busier, because we would begin to get requests for people who are faced with this challenge to be able to have one-on-one conversations, to meet with all these youth that we are talking about and envisioning and having hopes for.
Thank you. Any other final thoughts? Well, I want to thank each of you for joining us. I think this is such an important conversation, and this is a way, again, that we want to make sure that people are aware of the peaceful options for training and counseling that's available. So when we talk about wanting to make sure we share this, that we not only want to share it with young adults, but also adults within our congregations, and we want them to also be aware, because there's other ways that they can contribute besides talking to the young people within their life, but there's other ways. And so let me just talk about a few of those ways that can happen. One is that we do have a poster on the POTC website that is explorepotc.org, and we'll put that in our information as we advertise this webinar, that people would have that available. But they can download and print that poster, and you can put it up in our churches, well, I was going to say in our schools. That would need to have permission before that happens, but making sure that people are aware. I would also say watching the stories on the website. We saw 2 of those. They're short clips, and so they're so significant. The words that are being shared with us, encouraging others to share a story that they might have. Inviting high school students again to follow our social media and share that. We will be on TikTok, we're on Instagram, so making sure that word also gets out. Asking youth pastors to introduce youth to the website and our social media. You can also invite, Glenn's life was changed by Titus, let's just name it. So that's another option. You can invite members of the steering committee, counselors to speak at your church, at any other event that you might have, just to hear some of what the work is that's happening. I would say there's also, Joe mentioned the steering committee. There is always room on the steering committee if anyone wants to join that committee, particularly if you know someone, a young adult who would be interested in the work, that would want to be part of the steering committee to kind of set the direction for where this would go. I think that would be welcome. You're also welcome to let us know if you want to be a counselor. There would be space for any of that to happen. And just as important is also being able to contribute to the work being done by POTC through the MCUSA website or through the donate button on the POTC website. So that is also a way to join this work. If you're not able to be part of the steering committee or a counselor, we would welcome those contributions as well. I will have my email if you have questions is LorraineSA@MennoniteUSA.org. you can feel free to email me if there are any questions, or if you have any other thoughts that you would like to contribute. But joining us in this work, I think, is so significant. We appreciate those who are able to watch this video. We'll have it as a resource on our website and also on the POTC website, so share that as well. But a special thanks again to each of you for joining us and for being part of this work.